In early 2014, deputies in a small town in Oregon were searching a quiet 20-acre farm deep inside the forest. A local man had gone missing, and this farm was one of the last places anyone had seen him. But what one deputy discovered on the ground near a barn that day would shock the entire country and reveal something far more sinister hiding in that quiet town. For most people, Susan Monica had once lived a pretty successful life. She worked as an engineer in San Francisco and had a small group of close friends. But despite living in one of the most exciting cities in the world, Susan hated the busy lifestyle. She preferred silence, solitude, and living far away from other people. So in 1991, when Susan was in her early 40s, she decided to completely change her life. She left San Francisco and bought a 20-acre piece of land deep in the forests of rural Oregon. There was just one problem. The land she bought had absolutely nothing on it. No house, no barn, no electricity, no running water. It was just wild forest. But to Susan, it was perfect. She loved the idea of building everything herself. Using her engineering skills, she slowly constructed a small shack to live in, a large barn, and several animal pens for livestock. Over time, the empty land transformed into a quiet little farm hidden deep in the woods. However, running a farm alone turned out to be much harder than building it. Feeding animals, fixing equipment, maintaining buildings, it was exhausting work. Eventually, Susan realized she couldn't do it all by herself. So she started putting up help wanted flyers around the nearby town. Most of the people who responded were individuals who struggled to find work elsewhere. Some had criminal records. Others lived a transient lifestyle, moving from place to place. But Susan didn't care about their past. All she cared about was that they worked hard and left her alone. Over the next 20 years, dozens of workers came and went from Susan's farm. Some stayed for weeks, others for months. But eventually they would all move on, and Susan never heard from them again. That is, until January 1st, 2014. That morning, Susan, now 66 years old, was standing outside her shack when she saw something extremely unusual. A car was slowly driving up her dirt road. Because Susan lived so deep in the forest, visitors almost never came to her property. So she watched closely as the car pulled into her driveway. 3 young people stepped out, 2 men and a woman. Before Susan could even ask who they were, they immediately began explaining why they were there. They said they were looking for their father, a man named Robert Haney. Robert had been working on Susan's farm months earlier. According to them, he had told them he was doing odd jobs there and living in a camper parked on her property. Normally, Robert checked in with his kids every couple of months. But recently, they hadn't heard from him for a long time. And since Robert didn't own a cell phone or have a permanent address, they had no way of contacting him. So they came to Susan's farm, hoping she knew where he was. Susan immediately recognized the name. She explained that Robert had started working for her earlier that year. At first, he was a great worker, quiet, hardworking, and respectful. But after several months, things changed. Robert began drinking heavily. He stopped working regularly and spent long periods angrily talking about getting revenge on someone. Susan later learned that one of Robert's children had been assaulted, and he blamed himself for not protecting them. The guilt was eating him alive. Susan said the situation became disruptive to the peaceful environment she wanted on her farm. She had planned to confront him about it, but before she could, Robert suddenly came to her shack one day with an envelope of cash. He asked her to look after his dog for a while. Then he climbed into a white car that had pulled up outside the property and drove away. Susan told Robert's children that this happened about 4 months earlier, and she hadn't seen him since. She even showed them the camper where Robert had been living. Inside, all of his belongings were still there, including something very strange: his tool belt. Robert was a traveling handyman. His tools were how he made money. Leaving them behind made absolutely no sense. Feeling uneasy, Robert's children thanked Susan and drove straight to the local sheriff's office to report their father missing. But investigators quickly realized finding Robert would be extremely difficult. He had no phone, no permanent home, no digital trail. However, there was one possible lead. Robert had an EBT card, a government benefit card used to buy groceries, and those transactions could be traced. A few days later, investigators checked the card's history. It had been used just 1 month earlier at a Walmart about 30 minutes from Susan's farm. So detectives drove to the Walmart and reviewed hours of security footage. They expected to see Robert, but instead, they saw someone else: Susan Monica. She was the one using Robert's card. Now this was extremely suspicious. Investigators immediately obtained a search warrant and returned to Susan's farm. When deputies arrived, Susan calmly greeted them outside. The sheriff explained they were investigating Robert's disappearance and needed to search the property. Inside her home, the sheriff confronted her directly. He told her they had footage of her using Robert's EBT card and demanded to know where Robert was. At first, Susan looked shocked, but then, strangely, she looked relieved. She explained that Robert had actually given her the card along with the envelope of cash when he left. He told her to use it to buy food for his dog while he was gone. And since the cash eventually ran out, she started using the card. The sheriff realized something important. Using the card required a PIN number. If Susan truly stole the card, she wouldn't know that PIN, which meant her story might actually be true. It seemed like the investigation had hit a dead end. But just as the sheriff was about to leave the house, a deputy suddenly ran in from outside and whispered something in his ear. The sheriff's face twisted in shock. Then he turned back to Susan and quietly told her she needed to come to the station, because outside on her property, deputies had just found something: a human leg. During the interrogation at the station, the sheriff asked Susan one simple question: "Has anyone died on your property?" Susan paused. Then she began telling a story so disturbing, it would soon make headlines across the entire country. She said Robert actually had come back to the farm after leaving. One morning, while feeding her animals, she noticed something strange in the pig pen. All the pigs were crowded together in one corner, forming a circle around something on the ground. At first, she couldn't see what it was, but as she climbed into the pen and got closer, she realized the pigs weren't just looking at something. They were eating. In the middle of the pen, lying on his back, was Robert Haney. His body had been torn open, and unbelievably, he was still alive. Susan said he was groaning and weakly moving his arm while the pigs tore into him. She tried to scare the pigs away, but they kept coming back. According to Susan, she realized Robert was beyond saving. So she ran to the barn, grabbed a shotgun, returned to the pig pen, and shot him. She told investigators it was an act of mercy. Afterward, she left the body in the pig pen. 3 days later, she returned with bags and collected whatever pieces of Robert's remains the pigs hadn't eaten. She threw the bags into a trash pile in her barn. But clearly, not all the remains stayed there, because investigators had just discovered Robert's leg lying out in the open on her property. When asked why she never called 911, Susan gave a chilling answer. She was afraid authorities would euthanize her pigs, and she sold pork in the nearby town. If people learned her pigs had eaten a human, they might stop buying her meat. But as investigators would soon discover, Robert Haney might not have been the only person who disappeared after working on Susan Monica's isolated farm. And what they were about to uncover beneath that quiet Oregon property was far more horrifying than anyone could have imagined.